So 10 years ago, on an idyllic New England day, much like a day that we had today, you know the kind of day, beautiful blue skies, reds and oranges in the trees, a slight breeze. I stood on the side of a soccer field to watch my 11-year-old son play. With 3 small boys, it was probably my 500th soccer game that I had seen. And, you know, there were the sounds of the cheering crowds and the boys yelling and the whistles blowing. And there was that smell of the freshly manicured grass on this pristine field. But as I looked around that day, there was somebody new that I'd never seen before. He was small and he was skinny, but the look on his face far surpassed his years. There was anger, there was fear, there was determination, there was anxiety, and there was courage. And I wondered, who was this new guy on the field, and where did he come from?
I'd moved over from Uganda to Lincoln, Massachusetts to meet the mother I never knew, who had left me at the age of 2. From day one, it felt like a lonesome battle against this world, but I was very determined to make something out of this opportunity.
And now I look at that little boy, who's not so little anymore, as the man I've come to love as a son. It's been an incredible 10 years. So that anger has turned to passion to follow his dreams. That fear I've seen turn into trust of others and trust of himself. The insecurity he had then has really turned into commitment to help others and to commitment to follow his dreams. But those early years weren't always so easy. The disruption of culture from Uganda to America wasn't always easier if you're going into a class of 5th graders and 6th graders who aren't always so nice to somebody who's different. The disruption of family, to meet a mother that he hadn't known since he was 1 year old, whose perspective on how to raise children was Ugandan, and that didn't always fit with the American rules of what's right and what's wrong. But through it all, he and my son continued to become very good friends. So with the support of his biological mom, when we moved to Jackson almost 5 years ago, it was with great joy that we asked us to come and be a part of our family and join us on the adventure in Jackson. And now I can only laugh that boy, when he started football practice, thought it was so cold and didn't want to go again for a while, will go out on the coldest days and flip over, jumps in the snow, and is really setting himself up to be the first African snowboarder to go to the Olympics. And I remember homework in those early days. He hated to read. It was really, really painful. And now this guy is eating up organic chemistry texts as a junior at Westminster College, and I'm really proud to say was the youngest neuro-oncology intern that Mass General Hospital has ever had last summer. So the question when we look at it is, how did we get here, buddy?
Moving to Jackson that August 5 years ago was another culture shock. I had showed up for football tour days in the summer, but it felt like the middle of the winter with 30-degree morning practices. This made me question the initial move. There was another instance that added to this. One afternoon when I decided to babysit my little sister, I took her downtown to Haagen-Dazs and bought her ice cream. As I was sitting right next to the store playing with my phone, an angry taunt caught my attention. Looking up, I saw a man yelling, "Nigga, why are you raping that white girl?" Talk about disruption. I truly felt alone in that moment. However, I remember the letter that you wrote to the Jackson Hole News and Guide about the instance, Mom. It did not feel alone. The mayor himself came over and apologized on behalf of the town. Other adults handed out, like my football coach, handed out their phone numbers and asked me to call if this was ever to happen again. They made it very clear that this was not all right in their town, and perhaps I was not alone, and now I could start to trust.
That moment, that disruption, maybe a week into us coming to Jackson, was one of the most difficult moments of my life. It was really easy to let fear and visceral anger come in, and I didn't know what else to do. I'd been here 3 days, and I wrote a letter to the editor. I was so pissed off. But what happened in that disruption was the most beautiful thing, because it taught us as a family that we would have each other's backs, come hell or high water. And it wasn't always easy, but we were going to be there for each other, and we were going to support each other. It really taught me and taught Brolin and my kids and my husband that there was trust. We could do this thing together. And then I remember another time, that winter, the first time Brolin went out snowboarding with all of us. And his brothers had been on this mountain a lot before, but he hadn't seen those kind of steeps and deeps. And you know, adolescent boys, they're not going to give each other a break at all. So I tried my hardest to keep up, but you didn't always have so much fun that day.
Snowboarding in Jackson was something new. It was something that I've never done before in my life. In Boston, the closest places to snowboard were either on the outskirts of the city or nearby states of New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont. And in Jackson, everywhere you stood and looked, you had these gigantic mountains that were covered in this white powder. As we rode up the gondola, looking down, watching the trees and the cliffs pass by, I could not figure out if the anxiety I felt was either fear or joy. But I came to realize that it was a little bit of both. As I fell a little bit behind, trying to keep up with my brothers, going down Casper, through the trees, scared of my life, I initially got stuck. I got stuck in between two rocks. The stuck to where you could not move. You could not even budge. Watching my brothers laugh, chuckle around, but knowing they were not going to leave me, I was able to get myself up and out of this. A growth grew inside me as soon as I got out of that. That belief gave me the same confidence, not only as a snowboarder, but as an individual. And that next day, I was able to return and conquer that same hill and that same slope. And days after that, with my brothers pushing each other to improve our skills. Truly, I think that was the best day of my snowboarding career. Because looking back, I'll never think from that day that I would have an opportunity to represent my country as the first African Olympic snowboarder. I took that same confidence I got that day, and I put it in another aspect in my life. Growing up in Uganda, I never learned how to read. I've always had problems with it. And with a new confidence and belief in myself, I was able to approach one of the teachers from the Jackson Hole High School, and with our assistance, I was able to learn how to read just in time for college. This belief and trust in myself has allowed me to set goals and dreams that I've never thought I'll be able to set before.
So over these last 5 years, it's been amazing to see the connection and the growth. And believe me, you know, with all these adolescent boys, and teenage boys, there were times that were not always so perfect. But even with that, there was still a dark place in Brolin. There were nights he couldn't sleep. There were nightmares that I would hear where he would call out. There were night sweats a lot. And what he would talk about were the ghosts of things that had happened in those first 10 years of his life in Uganda. Incidents of violence that I think most of us here probably can't even imagine. Memories of a father who was very intimidating. And when we talk about how do we bridge those, how do we get through that, he didn't want to go back to Uganda because he was really afraid, as you would tell me, that he wouldn't be able to come back here. It was with a lot of excitement and joy this spring where I think there was enough commitment and trust and belief in all of us that Brolin agreed to go back. So in May, with Phil, my oldest son, and myself and some friends, we boarded a plane. And I saw the stress and anxiety in Brolin as we flew over the ocean and can only imagine what you felt because when we landed deep in the night in Entebbe, everything is different. Every sense of mine was on high alert. The smells are incredibly different. You don't even notice smells except when they're really different. The smells of spices, the smells of fires everywhere, burning and in the fields because that's the way they do agriculture. As we drove to Kampala from Entebbe, the throngs of people at midnight in the dark on the sides of the roads that had no lines, no stoplights, yet there are hundreds of people and donkeys and motorcycles and trucks and us, and we were just really happy to get to the hotel alive. And the Ugandan people are incredible people. But the next morning, before we were even over any kind of jet lag, two TV camera crews showed up to interview Brolin about being an Olympic snowboarder from Africa. And you handled it with such grace and poise, knowing that as soon as we were done, we were going to get in a car and go down the roads that he had seen in his dreams so many times. We were going to go down those narrow alleys, to the house that he grew up in, to meet the father that had become bigger than life in his mind. The father that he had last seen when Brolin was about this big when I first met him.
I'd been afraid to go back to Uganda to speak to my father, who I had not spoken to for a decade or seen at this point. I was terrified to go back. I was afraid that I would never be able to come back to the States. But initially after arriving, I realized this was a different culture, that my father was only doing his best and what he had to be able to let me grow up. He also just loved me, he just had a different way of showing it. I've yet to express and feel all these emotions from this trip, but shortly after returning, I felt a growth inside me, a growth that helped me as an individual look at life. That trip changed my perspective. I realized that I was blessed and happy with the life that I was set on. And as my growing trust grows, I've allowed to love and let others in my life. I've allowed a community to help me bring my dreams to light.
So we all have disruption, personal disruption, professional disruption. I see it in me and I saw it in Brolin. It's so easy to let anger and fear and insecurity fill us up. It's so easy to feel isolated and alone. But what you've taught me is if we can get comfortable enough stepping outside of our comfort zone, kind of trusting enough and taking a risk enough to start to trust and believe. As I look at you, as I look at the family that we have, anything becomes possible because love grows and dreams come with that, and the support underneath, both belief in yourself and belief from others, is infinite.
With belief comes trust, and a little bit of love comes confidence. That confidence has helped me grow as an individual. That same confidence has brought a community around me, allowing them to set me on a path. That path has helped me overcome my disruptions, and that same path has brought me in front of you to share my story. And I'm humbled, and I thank you for listening.
I love you.
Yeah, it worked. Yeah, that's great. It worked out.